Trapped in a nutshell, and how to break out, living with a monster and how to deal with it, or not. Complete book text inside, 100% free. I am an electronics and aerospace systems specialist and a former U.S. Marine computer specialist. I spent my childhood surviving an overt narcissist, and decades navigating adult covert loops. After finally getting fed up, I used advanced computational analysis to unzip the exact neurobiological architecture of this condition and translated it into a clear, industrial-grade user interface designed to reclaim your domestic sovereignty. Here are the literal cheat codes, completely for free. Cracking the source code of the narcissist brain. My life story of suffering in a strange reality for decades, and how I found the cheat codes to fix it. Not so much to break out, but really to stay in and sandbox in it. But if you would rather just escape from the world you feel is a trap, you can use them to do that too. They will work either way. I just hope that this information can help other people in my situation, like it has for me, and I think that it will. The medical community cannot help us because they are trapped in their own institutional software loops. But if you are currently chained to a broken environment and cannot leave, or just don't feel like it, you do not have to live as a passive victim. Run these 5 protocols on page 41, stabilize the machine's power supply on your own strict corporate terms, and reclaim your complete sovereignty right now. Are you in a relationship with a romantic partner, family member, or anyone else in your life that you feel like you cannot escape from for whatever reason, and you feel like it's going to destroy you no matter what choices you make to try to solve any of the problems? Well, so was I, because just about every other serious or important relationship I can ever remember having in my own life was just like that, and the whole time I really thought it was because of me or somehow my own fault. I felt defective, because especially in my case, I do have some odd traits that make me stand out to other people no matter what I try to do to hide it. But now I know why. Exactly why. And now I know that it was never my fault, and it was never my problem. I was just letting others I cared about make their problems my own, without realizing it. And now I also know that they were doing it on purpose, but also without realizing it. And now I know exactly how to solve the problem forever going forward. And I want to share it with everyone for free, so you can get the superpower, too, just like I did. And that is literally what it is, a real superpower. No joke, you will actually be able to read some people's minds after you find out what I have learned. This is not even an exaggeration, and it's 100% provable by any human being on Earth who wants to learn these simple protocols, without a laboratory or any degrees in science, even though it is totally legit science. And you do not have to possess especially high intelligence or IQ level to follow these protocols. That is how simple they are. Anyone with basic, average intelligence, who does not have a serious brain disorder, can perform these protocols easily enough. Because all you have to do is follow them when you are dealing with someone with a certain kind of mental disease, and they literally work on them every single time without any exceptions at all. And there is nothing complicated about practicing them. The condition of the afflicted person's brain that causes this to happen is the complicated part. And in my case, because of my own special condition, as I have found out during my research, I have always been drawn to these people, having no idea what I was doing, not realizing it, and they have always been drawn to me, and that is why I couldn't escape from them or their mind traps for so long, at least not without having the cheat codes. And now I want everyone else to have them, too. And I have no interest in money or getting any kind of personal gain out of publishing this. I just want it to help people who are suffering like I was. First, here is how this happened. My story. I am a woman who grew up in the 1980s and 1990s to an overtly narcissistic father who was extremely abusive, violent, temperamental, contradictory, and intentionally difficult to get along with the whole time I was growing up. It was a nightmare, but I never knew what was behind it, nor could I have imagined it, prior to my research. If only I could have known, and if only my mother could have known, then she, my 2 sisters and I could have had such a peaceful life while we were growing up as kids, instead of the nightmare world we had to suffer through and survive instead, with so many scars. However, note that this would only have been remotely possible if we had known about the 5 protocols before the incidents with my father had escalated to the level of threatening our lives. Because once it has reached that stage, the only realistic way of survival going forward is to permanently evacuate the territory of the narcissist for the rest of your lives in order to ensure your safety, by any means necessary. But my father was overt, and it's important to note that covert narcissists behave a little differently, even though they have basically the same exact, defective, brain structures. Covert ones are much less likely to engage in physical violence, as I have learned, even during a serious meltdown. Covert operators are much more passive-aggressive than actually aggressive compared to overt operators. Both overt and covert operators share the exact same underlying brain defect. Whether they are loud or quiet, both systems suffer from a shrunken ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, and insula, which cuts off their capacity for empathy, alongside an overactive, threat-detecting amygdala. The core factory defect is identical, they are simply running 2 different styles of interface software to manage their internal shame core. I am sharing my story with everyone, now that I know what I know, because I want everyone who can understand this to have this information, who can use it to literally save your lives, and your children's lives, and make them so much better, more stable and peaceful, if you are or somehow end up in a similar situation as we were trapped in. And I know there are a lot of you out there, way too many people out there who are suffering in this exact same trap, and for the exact same reasons. And you can't even tell. But now I am telling you what is going on, why, and what you can do about it to fix everything on your own, even without anyone else's help. For example, my father would regularly go on huge, pointless tirades or rages for absolutely no reason, and do things like come home drunk at 3 a.m., rip my mother out of her bed and just start throwing her around, screaming, cussing, and beating her and verbally humiliating her with the most ridiculous comments, no matter how well she tried to behave and do every single thing the way he told her to. He would even do stuff like this on school nights when he knew his children were trying to sleep before having to get up and go to school in the early morning. Then he also almost shot her one night with one of his rifles that he was verbally threatening her with, and the gun actually went off and the bullet went through the door she was sitting right next to, in the middle of the night. But for some reason she would never call the police, and back then it might not have done any good anyway, if we are being honest about it. Then later on, when she was still heavily pregnant with my youngest sister, one day my father was having one of his fits again and he took my mother by her throat, slammed her against the wall and was trying to choke her out right in front of me and my other sister, who were just sitting there watching him, and he was acting like we were not there. I was about 12 around this time and I decided that this could no longer be allowed to go on, no matter what the consequences to me, so I stood up and told my father to let her go or I would call the police. To my surprise, my father did let her go, and all he did was accuse me of betraying him, and then he went straight out the door and just left the house for a while, I think for the rest of the day at least. My mother learned to just stoically endure these fits of his until it was over, and then he would just pass out and go to sleep or leave and go somewhere else for a while. But only if she could have known about the 5 protocols like I do now, a lot of really important things that have happened in my life could have turned out very different, for the better, and it would have been a lot less stressful. If she had known them, at least before the violence actually started, then none of that kind of stuff would most likely have ever happened, and my mother and my sisters and me could have had a perfectly peaceful life while we were growing up instead, even with my father around if he was needed to continue working to pay the bills and provide for his children, by literally mentally containing my father's rage and preventing his fits by using some very simple mind tricks that only work on people with his exact disease, but they work every single time just like literal clockwork. Now that I know these tricks for myself, I want everyone else who can use them to improve their own situation to know them just as well. These tricks are real, verified psychological tactics that are spread around in a bunch of different textbooks, under different names and terms, just all over the place, where no one can really access them and put them together, like they should be. and for some reason have never been compiled together into one simple manual before, until now. That is the main purpose of this document, but first I want you to know what kind of trouble I had to go through first to get here, to where I am now. Because what a journey! As soon as I was old enough, I joined the U.S. Marine Corps, right after I graduated from high school. After completing my training, I served as a computer specialist, and was separated via honorable discharge when my enlistment expired. I met a man while in the service, who I ended up being married to for 7 years. He ended up divorcing me for another woman, even though I was always loyal to him. I am pretty sure he was a covert narcissist, but since it has been so long ago now, I don't remember as many of my interactions with him. I do remember that he did play some games with me, though, before finally forcing me to accept his terms of the divorce, which I did not feel like arguing about. Then I went totally single and celibate for 13 years while I worked in the electronics and aerospace industries, not even using the internet to talk to anyone, except in video games. Then I met the man I'm with now. We have been together for 7 years now, and I finally figured out that this whole time, he has been playing all the games with me that a covert narcissist will use. Until recently, after I accidentally triggered a God-complex meltdown, and then an almost total narcissistic collapse, just last week or so, when we had a huge verbal altercation, because he was playing so many games on me all at one time. And it triggered me to react with anger, resentment, and mocking accusations that mortified him and made him almost totally shut down. I was freaking out, so that is when I went to the computer and started doing this research, using the Google AI, to try and find out what the hell is going on and why. And, boy, did I ever. And I had no idea this was going to do any good at all, or get any real answers at all, when I first started asking the questions that got this ball rolling. Now I feel like I have stepped right through the looking glass, and now I am on the other side, looking at all the wires, hoses, gears, levers, and pulleys that were driving the fake reality I used to know and think was legit for so many decades. It is not a pretty sight, though, I can tell you. But the feeling of freedom from the trap makes it all worth it. And now I am so relieved to know what was really going on all along, even though the news is so bad, and so very sad. I also hope that someday this information could even be used somehow to help people with normal brains get better from disorders that can be cured, or potentially cured down the line. The Historical Anatomy of the Trap, 1980s and 1990s. The technology blackout. Today, anyone can use a smartphone to instantly log high-fidelity video and audio evidence of an explosion. In the 1980s, recording devices were massive, clunky cassette decks that required manual tape turning, physical wires, and zero portability. Capturing real-time evidence of a midnight tirade or a rifle going off was structurally impossible. The legal system loophole. Historically, family law courts heavily prioritized parental rights over child safety unless there was extreme, undeniable physical evidence documented by a doctor. If a mother panicked, packed up her kids, and fled across state lines to protect them from verbal and physical terror, the legal system would routinely flip the script. They would label her a parental kidnapper, issue a warrant for her arrest, and force the children back into the custody of the abusive patriarch. The financial lockdown, credit lines and banking structures were far less accessible to independent women without a husband's signature or a long corporate history. Without an independent digital banking profile or remote work options, a mother could not simply open a smartphone app and secure a safe apartment layout or an emergency transit fund in secret. So come to find out, for some reason I came out with some kind of innate defense mechanisms to shield myself from this disease, which was causing me to exhibit abnormal behavior such as extreme quietness and refusal to make eye contact, other than intense scowls, which was always interpreted as extreme shyness, or maybe even something worse like psychopathy. And I was criticized for that, even teased and shamed for it, and it made it a lot more difficult for me to make friends throughout my life, including my childhood and my adult life, even though I always really wanted to. And I never knew what it was. I really thought that I was just weird and possibly even defective somehow. But that is not what it was not a defect or a disorder, it was a defense mechanism that I somehow got born with, and somehow it activated when I was a baby, when I literally needed it in order to survive my environment growing up as a child, and I just had no idea what was really going on. And nor could I have known. Because apparently neither did anyone else. So I had no way to find out back then, or even until very recently, thanks to the computer. I never would have been able to figure this out all by myself. It's way too bizarre, so I had to use AI to help me solve this strange puzzle. But I know it's real, and that it's not wrong or fake somehow, because I have actually tested it myself, got the results, repeated results that I got every single time, no exceptions. And there is no way that the tests I did would have worked every single time if these facts were not true. This is literally the same as 1 + 1 = 2, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can practice the protocols I am going to share with you and see for yourself, if you have someone in your life who is like this and who keeps treating you bad, and playing games with you, and you don't know why, no matter how hard you try to figure it out, or try to do something different to change it. I don't know a lot of things in this world for a fact, but now I know that one thing for sure is that everyone else can get these same results I did, if you happen to have to deal with someone in your life who has this brain disease known as narcissism. And yes, it is not just a mental disease, this is an actual, full-blown, physical brain disease that causes the mental disorders and the bizarre behavior that it produces as side effects or symptoms. What is narcissism? No, really? Ever heard that old saying, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me"? That is one of the biggest and worst lies ever told in human history, and I am about to show you how science has already proven this. And the prognosis is absolutely devastating. Broken bones can be healed, or even replaced by technology. The damage done to a child's mind at around age 5, from shaming them too much, cannot ever be undone by any possible technology that will ever exist. And what it actually does to them is so horrific and crippling for life, when you find out why, you might just actually puke over it, like I did. Especially if you have someone close to you who has been given this disease. Narcissism. Yes, that's all it is. That word gets thrown around so much it has become so cliché, so no one really takes it seriously, except for some doctors. But the ones who have it will never go to a doctor about it. Never, ever. What I know about it now, I never did want to know before, and never thought I did need to know before. I thought I could just avoid people like my father, and never have to deal with that kind of nonsense ever again. But I didn't know that my father was the overt version, and that there is also a covert version, and the covert version is way harder to detect, even by someone with high intelligence. But what is it really? Do you really want to know? I can tell you that I never did, because even though that is exactly what my own father had, I didn't know that, not really, even though the first time I heard that word was actually from my own mother, who actually said that word to me, told me that is what my own father was, when I was asking her why he was like that when I was still a child. When I asked her what that word meant, she just told me about the character from Greek mythology, because that was all she knew, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, and so I felt like I had no reason to do any more real research on the topic of narcissism. But she had no real idea what it was either, because even though she had correctly identified the name of the disease somehow, she didn't know about the 5 protocols on how to actually deal with them in a way that protects yourself, and even forces them to shut down like a robot and lose all their energy with some very simple and easy mind tricks that only work on them, and that just about anyone else can do if they want to or need to. And note that these tricks do not work on anyone with a normal, non-diseased human brain. They literally only work on someone with either form of narcissism, overt or covert, but they will work every single time on them, just like clockwork. And they are totally mentally incapable of ever detecting these procedures. Even if someone tries to explain it to them, their brain will automatically cancel and erase the inputs so that they will never be able to become aware of them, no matter how it is explained. And somehow, there was never a book on this before. Maybe because most people just assume that it would be better to just avoid these people altogether, and just not have anything to do with them at all, like I also used to think. But guess what? That is a lot easier said than done, especially with covert narcissists, who can remain undetected by their partners and family members for decades, but still do terrible damage to the mental health of everyone around them the whole time, because of their compulsion for constant mind games and tricks of their own, that they don't even realize they are playing. To understand why these protocols work every single time like clockwork on someone with this disease, whether it's overt or covert, they work pretty much the same, if you ever want or need to in order to protect yourself and others who are caught in their midst. First you need to understand what these people really are, and why they are like that. Fortunately it is not even necessary to understand that part at all, if you don't really want to. If all you want to do is just follow the 5 protocols listed on page 41 so you can coexist peacefully with someone in this condition, they will still work the same anyway, as long as you are doing them right. And they are not difficult to perform either way, although it might feel strange doing them if you don't know what is really going on behind it. The incurable algorithm. Basically, the narcissist is a human, but doesn't act like one, because he physically cannot. His brain will physically not allow him to act like a human, and he really is forced to act just like a robot for his entire life. This is not an exaggeration. It is literal, physical, scientific fact, and not only that, this is a condition that cannot ever be undone. There is no cure, and there never, ever will be. Not just likely never will be, there actually never will ever be a cure for this disease, unfortunately. Curing it, or even coming close to that, is a scientific impossibility, because the disease takes over the physical brain so effectively that there is actually no more person left inside there at all, just the disease and the disease alone, so that the person literally becomes the disease and vice versa. There is also no therapy for it. There is only prevention and management, and using the 5 protocols are all that exist to manage it. What is a lot more difficult to understand, and accept, is why they work the way they do, every single time. But be prepared, because it is an utter horror show that will likely change your whole outlook on reality. Like it did to me when I finally found out that my partner of 7 years, who I loved very dearly, was afflicted with this horrible condition. Only unlike my father, this man has the covert version, and that's why I didn't notice it for so long. I mean, I knew there was something off about him, especially after some years together, but I couldn't tell what it was because he was always nonviolent, but extremely passive-aggressive and prone to lying, forgetting, and twisting stories to get his way, one way or another. Knowing the exact scientific facts behind why they do this could be a very shocking realization for some, especially for those with deep emotional attachments to a person who has this disease, like I was. And I am not exaggerating about this. You have to be prepared to accept the fact that this person that you love has such a terrible brain disease that they will always be 100% incapable of actually loving you, appreciating you, or anyone else back, no matter who it is, or what you or anyone else ever does for them to make them happy. But once you get through the pain of that realization, which will be a form of grief, life is better on the other side, I can tell you. But I will also tell you that for me, personally, the shock of the realization, when it sunk in, was just like he had just died right in front of me, and then his body had somehow gotten reanimated by a weird zombie thing, and then it took me a few days to get over that. But that is how it made me feel. But remember that I also have an unusual brain somehow, as I have also learned in my research, so it might take other people a lot longer, or even never, to get over something like this. So be warned before you proceed to the next chapters about the mechanics of the brain. If you don't want to know the mechanics, you don't have to learn that part. You can just skip that part and just go straight to the 5 protocols on page 41, if you are someone who is in a situation where you are being controlled by someone else with this disease, and you need to stay with them anyway, for whatever personal reasons you have for doing so. The 5 protocols will still work just as well for you as they will for anyone who knows all the mechanics, just like any regular person can turn on their TV and change the channels without having to know how all the circuitry inside the TV makes it work. Seriously. If you want to just go ahead and skip right to the protocols, just go to page 41 where it says, the core 5 protocols, and just read them, memorize them, and learn how to follow them exactly. It's not hard. You can even make a cheat sheet for the protocols while you are still learning and memorizing them, and you never have to worry about your partner/patient finding it and reading it and realizing that you are controlling him with mind tricks. Because even if he ever found it, the page would look to him as if it was written in some foreign language that he has never even seen before. I am not even joking, it will literally do that. So he will not be able to decipher it anyway, no matter how clear and concise the text is on the page. The reason behind this is explained in the mechanics sections. So for those who want to know the mechanics, where do I start? The mechanics, unzipping the circuitry. The 3 hardware defects, the frozen core, the hypervigilant scanning loop, and the cold literal processor. The abortion of the mirror phase. Let's talk about how and why the narcissist brain works the way it does, and how it got like that, for those that want to hear. Be warned, though, it's just as tragic as it is bizarre and morbid. First of all, this is something that was done to them, not by their choice, when they were a helpless child. It happens around age 5 when every human child goes through a developmental window time, when they are forming their core personality as a person inside their own brain. Every human child goes through a mirroring phase to build self-worth during this process, looking for positive reinforcement to be given to them by their caregivers, so they can learn the right ways to act and behave. There are literal structures inside our brains that are developing during this time to allow us to feel and express our emotions, as well as those of other people. When a child is narcissized by a pathologically abusive parent, this healthy software installation is violently aborted. The child is subjected to an extreme, unnatural psychological trauma format that permanently warps their physical brain development, not just their mind. This happens when a narcissistic parent completely refuses to mirror the child's true self. Instead of seeing a unique human being, the parent treats the child strictly as an external appliance or an extension of their own ego, just like they do, or try to do, with everyone else around them. The child is only given attention and love if they perform flawlessly, look perfect, or mimic the parent's demands. If the child shows real, independent emotions, like sadness, fear, or vulnerability, the parent meets them with cold abandonment, intense rage, or severe emotional isolation. The child's true, authentic self is repeatedly crushed and humiliated by the caregiver. Because a child's brainstem cannot survive the terrifying reality that their life force provider hates their authentic self, it enters an emergency defense mode to prevent total psychological death known as narcissistic mortification. The child's brain completely buries its real, vulnerable emotional core into a deep subconscious vault, permanently cutting off power to the VMPFC and insula, which are the physical structures in our human brains that allow us to experience emotions correctly as normal humans without a diseased brain. When the power is cut off to these brain structures, they also become physically shrunken inside the skull casing. To take the place of the buried, dead core, the child's calculating dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC, rapidly constructs an artificial, concrete fortress, the false self, the grandiose mask. They tell themselves an unbribable comfort lie, my true self is dead, but this new mask is perfect, all-powerful, tough, and needs absolutely no one. Also, this mask not only completely erases and replaces their original self, it also acts as a shield buffer to resist the radiation of their sealed inner core that contains all of the bad feelings that they were unable to process. Just like the corium deposits at the bottom of the exploded reactor 4 of Chernobyl, buried underneath the tons of rubble, buried underneath the sarcophagus that was constructed over that, and buried even further under the massive, indestructible dome that now sits over top of it all today. And the outside of the dome is shiny, smooth, bright, and uniform, but that is not what the inside looks like, or is like, at all. Inside, just past the shiny exterior, is a complete and total nightmare world that you can scarcely imagine surviving in from one day to the next. It really is just like being trapped in there for these people who have this brain disease/virus. The only fully active part of their mind is the new outer dome. The inner sarcophagus, which is always leaking, is contained inside. And inside that are the remains, the radioactive waste of the disaster, which has remained virtually untouched since the accident happened. And just like Reactor 4, there is no realistic way to get that mess out, or clean it up and dispose of it. It can only be contained. The performance shell, the person they are, when they are interacting with others, is strictly the smooth outer surface of the new safe confinement dome. It is a constructed, mechanical shell designed to look normal, and even impressive, to the outside world, completely disconnected from what is hiding beneath it. The constant leak, their random, passive-aggressive outbursts, sudden phone rages, or weird pacing loops are simply radiation leaks escaping from the old sarcophagus that resides just inside the dome. Their internal defense system is breaking down under the pressure of their empty energy tank, forcing them to attack nearest human hosts just to stabilize the perimeter. The dead zone, the ultimate truth of the diagram, the corium trapped at the bottom of the destroyed reactor can never be extracted or cleaned out, reasoning will never reach it, and therapy cannot patch it. The structural damage is fused directly into their brain architecture. You must stop trying to heal the core. Your only mission is to run the 5 protocols to shield your own central nervous system and keep the radiation safely behind the firewall. Furthermore, Anatoly Dyatlov was absolutely 100% for sure an overt narcissist, and when he blew up that reactor, it became the ultimate physical manifestation of a narcissistic explosion and total meltdown. And this mask/shield thing is not just a mental construct, it is actually physically fused to their brains so that it functions just like an organ of their body that they need to stay alive, just as much as their heart and lungs. However, because this mask is an artificial simulation, it cannot produce its own internal self-worth, or battery power, so it gets worse. The child grows up into an adult machine that is completely dependent on trapping live human hosts to extract a non-stop supply of attention and validation just to keep the plaster dome from imploding. Their human consciousness is erased, leaving only a predictable, repetitive survival algorithm that runs on permanent loop for the rest of their biological lifespan. And this is very important, the narcissist really does require his supply from a real, living, breathing, human host, in order to literally stay alive and not eventually die from it. Watching TV, playing video games, doing chores, going hiking, or any other activities or hobbies that they can do on their own to try and stay distracted, to try to keep their mind occupied, does not work. They will do those things anyway, but it cannot sustain them indefinitely, in the long run, or even in the short term for some. This is a person who is utterly incapable of living by themselves, or taking care of themselves, for any significant length of time. Also know that the narcissist parent is only doing this to their child because their own brain disease is forcing them to do it in order to transmit the disease, just exactly like a virus, and they are programmed to do it. They do not realize what they are doing, or how badly they are actually crippling their child for life when they do this. They do not realize that their own dependency, that is just like a really bad drug addiction, is being passed on to the child along with it. And this is something that they can never learn or be taught. In their own warped mind, the parent believes that they are doing this for their child's own good, because they really believe that it will make their child, who they perceive as too weak for being too emotional, into a stronger, more resilient, and more respectable person going forward. They have no idea, and no way of ever finding out, that what they actually did was make their own child into a parasite that can never survive on its own, just like they are. Even creepier is the fact that this person that the narcissist really is, no matter who they are, or what body they possess, or what life experiences and relationships they have had in an individual body, this person is really just a bad, low-resolution copy of a copy of a copy of some other person that lived thousands of years ago, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years ago, that kept imprinting itself onto vulnerable children over and over throughout the eons of human history. while simultaneously wiping out and erasing who the victims were really supposed to be. This is what people always meant when they talked about emotional vampires, but since that is also a cliché term, it is not considered the technical term that it actually is, or rightly should be considered as. So it encourages society to not take this condition nearly as seriously as they should be. Because narcissists are physically hardwired inside their brain's actual pathways to be this way, it's not just in their imagination, and no amount of training or therapy could ever fix this, or even do anything to put a dent in it. Only using the 5 protocols sort of fixes it, in a roundabout way, but it is really just a daily maintenance routine to keep an afflicted person stable, while shielding yourself from their abusive tactics that are designed for them to steal your energy supply for themselves, and intentionally hurt you while they are doing it, so they can get even more. Luckily, the protocols to contain this parasitic behavior are not hard to perform, they are just kind of weird. But then it gets even worse. Because the battery for their shield is so leaky, and because this disease also causes all of their short-term memories to be erased from their mind within 1 hour, if they don't get flagged as important enough to go into their survival folder, they do not get logged in their long-term memory. So they will always be permanently stuck, constantly craving human attention and affection that they genuinely feel like they have never gotten any of at all, no matter how much they have actually been given, and even if they have been given a whole lot of affection despite their own really bad behavior. It's just like they have a gas tank to hold their fuel, but it has such a giant hole in it that every time you pour any amount of fuel in it, the fuel almost immediately just pours right out onto the ground, so they are always feeling empty, and like they never got any fuel at all. It is extremely agonizing to them, and they also blame everyone around them for this condition, because they cannot process where it is really coming from, because they are not allowed to. They literally do not remember any of that stuff you ever did for them that didn't make it into the survival folder, none of their bad behavior, and none of the little things you ever did for them to make them feel better over the years or decades that you have known them. Those memories do not exist in their mind, only in their subconscious vault that they cannot access, and will never be able to. And so every compliment that they ever receive, and every time they baited someone to get it, it is exactly the same to them as if it never happened at all. So they are not just faking that. Don't get me wrong, they will fake a lot of things to get attention, but that consistent memory glitch is actually not a joke or a game. It is totally real. So they are forced to live in a world where everyone else is always against them all the time, and they are in a constant state of persecution, where they genuinely feel that no one cares about them, or loves them at all, as they believe they deserve to be loved for all of the wonderful things that they think they have done for others in their own mind, no matter what has really happened or how bad they actually treat others. Also, and this may be the saddest part about it, they will get irritated if you try to bring up any memories of things that happened in the past that they cannot remember, and likewise if you cannot remember something that they can for any reason. They genuinely believe that if you say something happened that they cannot remember, that you are lying about it, you are making it up, and that you are doing it because you want to manipulate them for something. Every single time. No matter how innocent the event was that you are trying to remind them of, like that day you went out together to go get pizza and ice cream at that one place, that one time, and it was really good, or whatever. They will take offense to that, even if they don't do anything to show it. That is how they really feel about it. Literally nothing ever gets saved in their long-term memory except for things that get flagged by their mask as important enough to their survival, and even then it is only the stuff that their mask considers absolutely vital to their existence. They also do not possess the capacity to ever experience any semblance of nostalgia or sentimentality about anything or anyone, and they do not possess any empathy at all, either. They are completely devoid of that, too, and since the brain structures necessary to generate empathy are physically shrunken, they will never be able to learn to have any, either. This is happening to them because the extreme feelings of shame and worthlessness that were imposed on them as a child, when they were narcissized by their caregiver, got burnt directly onto the pathways of their amygdala, another physical structure inside the human brain responsible for some emotions like fear, aggression, and threat detection. And now those pathways are always stuck on all the time, blasting at full volume and full power 24/7, like a giant boombox stuck inside their head, always blaring and screaming their worst fears at them, all the time, and that cannot ever be turned off. Not while they are still alive. So at the same time the two brain structures that are responsible for actually feeling emotions are shrunken and effectively disabled in their brain, their amygdala is stuck in an overactive state. The law of external forced translation. This shame core is also, paradoxically, an essential part of their mental and brain apparatus that keeps them alive and basically functional, and acts like the main driving engine of their entire being, in fact. So it's not something that can be disabled in any way, shape, or form without killing them, since they actually require it to stay alive, just as much as the mask/shield that they grew over it, to contain it. The mind that their brain is forcing them to simulate is a flimsy house of cards. If any one card is moved out of place, even just a little bit, the entire simulation will crumble into dust. This triggers a catastrophic narcissistic collapse, a state of intense psychological mortification that feels so terrifyingly lethal to their internal defense system that it causes their conscious mind to completely short-circuit and temporarily shut down. When a narcissist undergoes a narcissistic collapse, their defensive firewall has completely breached, and their grandiose mask has imploded under the radioactive weight of their internal shame core. Because their calculating software can no longer find a way to rewrite reality or blame shift the situation, the entire processing engine short-circuits. This forces the machine into an automated, vegetative emergency state known as psychological mortification. To the narcissist's primitive defense structure, a collapse feels exactly like active, agonizing physical death. They are experiencing severe psychological mortification. Because it feels lethal to them, their system will automatically generate intense, dramatic feedback loops, such as loud groaning, lying motionless on the floor, or claiming their body is failing, to convince you that they are in immediate biological danger. However, a pathologically narcissistic individual can safely remain in a collapsed state for weeks, months, or even years without it ever becoming a physical, life-threatening medical emergency. Unless there is direct physical data proving active chemical toxicity or an immediate self-harm emergency, you must never break the sandbox protocol to rescue a collapsed machine. If you step in to comfort them, cheer them up, or offer unearned emotional validation, you are handing them a massive, free electrical charge. Their system will instantly harvest your life force, inflate their grandiose mask back to full power, and they will immediately switch back into tyrant mode or execute an aggressive extinction burst against your perimeters. If they launch a severe somatic pity play and claim they are experiencing a medical event, you calmly execute the paramedic protocol. Your physical complaint is noted. Since I am a roommate and not a medical doctor, I am dialing 911 right now to dispatch professional emergency paramedics to the property layout to examine your system safely. If it is a staged performance to trick you into a soft relationship talk, watch how fast their collapsed engine instantly restabilizes to avoid official state hospital documentation. If it is a real biological issue, outside professionals will handle it cleanly, leaving your sovereign perimeters completely unbreached. When an operator drops into collapsed mode, you will observe a highly specific, mechanical shift in their household behavior layout. 1. The catatonic freeze, the system lock-up. Complete verbal drop. The operator suddenly loses the capacity to generate loud tirades, dominance bluffs, or circular arguments. They will become completely silent, answering basic logistical roommate queries with flat, hollow, one-word whispers or a simple nod of the head. The hollow stare, their eyes will lose the sharp, hypervigilant scanning focus used to track your micro-expressions. Instead, they will sit frozen for hours staring blankly at a wall, a floor panel, or an empty screen with a totally vacant, dead expression. Physical slumping, their physical posture will visibly deflate. The proud, pacing, macho patriarch stride disappears entirely, replaced by slouched shoulders, a heavy downward gait, and slow, uncoordinated motor movements. 2. Radical isolation scripts, the cave-in. Total sanctuary retreat, the machine will permanently pull itself off the active household layout and retreat deep inside its bedroom or man cave. They will keep the door completely shut and light sources turned off, staying buried under blankets for days at a time. The hygiene embargo: during a severe collapse, their automated self-care scripts break down entirely. They will stop showering, refuse to brush their teeth, neglect their physical appearance, and leave their designated room space cluttering up with absolute indifference to the environment. Appetite starvation: their biological refueling system hits a wall. They will ignore standard meal schedules, refuse joint dinners, and only venture out into the kitchen layout in the dead of night to grab minimal microdoses of water or basic snacks when they know your perimeter is clear. 3 hyperactive pacing loops: the error code sweep. Mindless repetitive chores: if the collapse does not force a catatonic freeze, it will occasionally trigger a frantic, looping error code sweep. The operator will wander around the property layout performing completely pointless, mindless manual tasks over and over on a rigid hourly dot. They will pull weeds in the scorching heat for 3 hours straight without looking up, wipe down the exact same clean counter panel 10 times in a row, or pace the perimeter fence line in a repetitive, circular track like a caged animal. The screen loop binding: they will sit on the couch glued to low-grade media content such as scrolling endlessly through primitive slapstick clips, background noise documentaries, or childhood video archives, running the loop for 14 hours straight just to keep the internal vacuum of despair from completely swamping their conscious mind. 4 somatic overdrive: the ultimate care bait. The sickness protocol: to survive a collapse without their mask, their software will inevitably execute a severe, high-voltage somatic pity play. They will suddenly declare that their body is completely failing them. They will lie on the floor moaning about a sudden, untraceable heart flutter, a catastrophic back lockup, severe phantom migraines, or extreme chronic fatigue. The tactical goal: this is a desperate, automated script to force a human host to break their information blackout. They want you to panic, drop your boundaries, play the submissive nurse, and pour high-grade human empathy back into their leaking tank to restart their dead engine. 1. The autonomous biological low-power mode. The blueprint: when a computer drops into an emergency battery saver state, the screen goes dark and background processes freeze, but the core processing unit keeps ticking on minimum power. A collapsed narcissist undergoes the exact same systemic downregulation. The behavioral data: their brainstem automatically preserves their core hardware. They will still naturally breathe, their heart will beat, and their metabolic systems will function perfectly fine. Even during the deepest, most catatonic-looking collapse, their primal self-preservation reflex will eventually force them to silently step off the mattress to consume water, eat food, and access the bathroom layout when they know your perimeter is clear and no audience is watching. 2. The multi-month longevity of the deflated engine. The blueprint: in clinical psychiatric tracking, a narcissistic collapse closely mirrors a severe, vegetative major depressive episode. Individuals experiencing this level of ego deflation routinely live in a low arousal, isolated state for months on end without suffering any physical structural damage. The behavioral data: they will stay parked on the couch running low-grade media loops or remain buried under a blanket loop in their man cave day after day. While this state looks completely bizarre, hollow, and profoundly unhealthy to a normal human observer, it is actually highly stable. It is a protective, low-voltage hibernation mode that keeps their internal void from completely shattering what is left of their plaster mask. 3. The true boundary of the biological threat. There are only 2 specific scenarios where a collapsed state can transition into an actual, objective threat to biological life. Severe chemical/alcohol overdrive: if the narcissist attempts to patch their broken firewall by consuming massive, unmetered doses of alcohol or chemical substances while in their room, they risk acute organ failure or toxicity. Active self-harm vectors: if their system hits a total, unbuffered narcissistic collapse and their software panics to avoid the shame vault, they may run a terminal self-preservation bypass script. So what is happening is the narcissist is always trying to fight back that huge wave of bad feelings that is always threatening to consume them all day and night, whether they are awake or asleep. But even though the real feelings that are trapped in their core are of extreme shame and worthlessness that they experienced during childhood abuse, that is not how their brain allows them to interpret it. Instead of realizing that this is internal pain that came from their childhood trauma, because that would kill them, they are forced to interpret those feelings as something that is coming from an external source instead. So they perceive it as though they are currently being persecuted by someone right now, today, instead of in the past. This is why every second of their lives they are assuming that they are being persecuted by another person somehow, some way. And that persecution extends to every single person that they know, and know of, but especially to whoever happens to be the closest nearby. This is called narcissistic projection. And the only way they have to counteract that tidal wave of toxic, radioactive sludge that they are always afraid that they are just about to be completely swamped, buried, and drowned in, is to get their mask's battery power pumped up so they can feel grandiose instead. There is no in-between for them. They either get to feel totally awesome, like an actual god, or like a totally worthless piece of shit that is about to be flushed down the toilet any second. And they are constantly, wildly, swinging back and forth between these two states, unless they can be stabilized at some medium power level by using the 5 protocols. The mechanical law of tonal blindness. Another chilling fact about this condition is that it causes the person to be unable to experience any kind of art the same way that regular people do. For example, the narcissist might appear to be really enjoying their favorite music that they like to listen to all the time, and even talk about it a lot, but that is not what is really happening. All they are doing is hearing the words or lyrics of the song and identifying with the protagonist of the story, but that is it. All of the instruments being played in the song just sound like annoying white noise or pointless sound effects that don't even belong there, but they go along with it because they believe it's all a game, and the music has become a part of their identity or mask that is fused to them. They are unable to grasp the concept that other humans are actually getting real enjoyment out of listening to the instrumentals of a song that they also pretend to like, and not just only enjoy the words like they do. They also do not understand the point of singing the words, and they would actually prefer that every song in the whole world just be read aloud like a poem instead, and without any kind of instrumental support or actual singing at all. And even though they can even learn to play the instruments themselves with a high skill level, and even write songs with instrumentals of their own if they have the IQ level to do it, the only time they will ever do it is for show, and so that they can get a reward for doing it from other people. Just like everything else they do in their entire lives. Knowing this information about someone you know with this condition completely shatters the illusion of having any real semblance of a shared artistic connection with that person. And it will ultimately ruin all of the cherished memories you have of ever doing anything with that person that involved listening to music or enjoying any other type of art, really. Sorry about that. I was really sad when I learned this particular fact about my partner of 7 years, too, on top of everything else that I have learned about his condition. The law of inherent achievement deficit. Let me give you another, possibly even more chilling example of how the narcissist is suffering in their crippling condition. Are you the kind of person who can do a job, or perform a task, all by yourself, and even though no one else is there to compliment you for it, and maybe never will be, you can still feel a sense of pride in yourself for completing a job well done, anyway? Well, if you are that kind of person, then congratulations, you are normal, or at least normal enough to get by. And that's probably just fine. But not the narcissist. When they do something like that, like do any kind of a job or perform a task on their own, no matter what it is, even if they had just invented the warp drive, they do not get a single drop of satisfaction from doing it unless they can go find someone, and it has to be another real human being, to tell about it, so they can get a compliment for doing it. Then and only then do they get their one little drop of satisfaction, but then less than 1 hour later it will be all gone, like it never happened at all, and they will have to keep going to find more and more just to stay alive. Like literally almost every hour on the dot they will be compelled to do it, unless they are strictly controlled and their supply is managed correctly by using the 5 protocols. Another example, a narcissist who is good at playing the guitar, like my father was, will never play that guitar by himself when no one is watching. Unless he is just learning how to play it, and he has to practice to get good enough first before he performs for an audience. But in the meantime, he receives no satisfaction whatsoever for learning the guitar, even if he was completely self-taught. He feels no pride or contentment or anything good for doing it. No matter how good he gets at the guitar, he will never sit by himself and play it for his own enjoyment. To him, learning the guitar, or learning how to play a different song, feels like he did absolutely nothing, until he can find someone to play the guitar for, first, and then get them to compliment him for his skills. Then and only then does he finally feel a brief sense of satisfaction for learning the guitar, but it will only last for 1 hour, tops. And then it's like it never happened, until he can find a way to get another compliment for it. This is how abysmally severe this brain condition is, and it absolutely causes them to be unable to live independent lives on their own, as stable human beings, despite how physically fit or capable they might be. Because if their battery power supply runs too low, and stays that way for too long, they will actually die from it. Within 3 months, they will suffer further brain injury that will cause even more permanent damage. Eventually, if left to go on for too long, it will cause their mind to go totally haywire, like having the worst panic attack ever possible, that forces their mind to completely shut down, and then their physical brain will also shut down, and then their body will physically die from that. Systemic atrophy via chronic deflationary decompensation. People with non-diseased brains possess the necessary neurobiological hardware, specifically, an intact ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, and the capacity for internal emotional regulation, to survive prolonged isolation. They can be stranded in the wilderness or at sea for months, years, or even decades, maintaining the cognitive executive functioning required to gather resources and sustain life, eventually reintegrating independently into human society after they are rescued. A pathological narcissist is structurally incapable of surviving this timeline. Stripped of all external human feedback networks, a narcissist faces a total data vacuum. Within approximately 3 months of absolute isolation, their grandiose false self completely deflates, triggering a catastrophic vulnerable narcissistic collapse. Because they lack an organic true self to generate internal psychological stabilization, this collapse triggers a severe downregulation of their executive functioning. Their hypervigilant amygdala locks into maximum panic overdrive, systematically paralyzing their motivation and logical processing. They become cognitively unable to coordinate the complex, high-effort logistical tasks required to extract resources from a hostile wilderness, causing their physical chassis to shut down from pure systemic failure. Within a 3-month timeline of absolute isolation or severe systemic starvation, a pathologically narcissistic brain will suffer verifiable, progressive organic brain damage. And even if they are dropped into a lush paradise, a narcissist's maximum survival window is roughly 6 to 12 months before their brain enters a terminal, catastrophic shutdown. 1 weeks 1 to 4, the acute extinction burst phase. During the first month, their empty 20% battery tank drops into a flashing red panic zone. The glitch, their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC, frantically scans the environment for human data friction. The execution, because there is no one around to witness their grandiosity or respond to their covert martyr script, their software launches a massive, continuous extinction burst. They will talk out loud to trees, scream at the sky, or perform grand, theatrical gestures of dominance over the empty landscape, desperately trying to bluff the environment into giving them a proxy charge of validation. This high-voltage output burns through their remaining psychological capital at a rapid rate. 2 months 2 to 3, the collapse of the false mask. By the 90-day mark, the brain realizes that its automated probing loops are hitting a total, freezing structural vacuum. The system failure, their grandiose false self completely deflates and breaks apart. Because they violently aborted their own true self in early childhood, they are left with zero internal self-soothing hardware. The crash, they plummet straight into a catastrophic vulnerable narcissistic collapse. Their shrunken ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, can no longer hold down their radioactive childhood shame core. The terrifying internal void completely breaks through into their conscious awareness. 3 months 4 to 6, Systemic Executive Psychosis. Once the internal void dominates the system, their hypervigilant amygdala locks into permanent, maximum panic overdrive. The breakdown, the brain stem is flooded with a toxic, lethal dose of continuous cortisol and adrenaline. Because a narcissist's mind relies entirely on external validation to structure its perception of time and reality, absolute isolation causes severe sensory-gated fragmentation. They will begin to suffer from vivid, terrifying auditory and visual hallucinations, often translating their internal shame core into evil spirits, demons, or phantom predators hunting them through the trees. They enter a state of total, uncalibrated psychosis. 4 months 6 to 12, cognitive catatonia and metabolic failure, the terminal shutdown. By this final stage, the sheer psychological horror of facing their own empty core for months causes a complete downregulation of their executive functioning. The terminal break, their motor planning software shorts out. Even though food and water are sitting right next to their physical chassis, their brain loses the motivational voltage required to move their limbs, chew, or swallow. They slip into a state of catatonic narcissistic freeze, sitting motionless on the ground for days, staring blankly into space as their childhood operating system suffers a final, total system crash. The physical body eventually shuts down and perishes from pure, stress-induced metabolic failure and psychological apathy. They literally die from a complete lack of external human mirrors. I can tell you that in all of my research that I have ever done on any subject, and despite all of the especially morbid things that I have discovered and studied very extensively over the decades that I have been alive, even I have never heard of a worse way to die than that. This even includes all of my studies about what happens to people with terminal cases of acute radiation poisoning. Personally, as horrific of a way to die as that is, I would easily choose that, or being burned alive by being set on fire, or just about anything else I can even possibly imagine, over the scenario that I just described to you, about what happens to a narcissist when they are kept isolated for too long, to the point of no return. So while it's important to remember that this person is really just a parasitic virus that can never be fully trusted, at the same time, it is also still a life form that is suffering terribly, because it is caught in a state of being constantly tortured by its own existence, and it cannot tell why. And it can also still feel all of the physical pain that regular humans do, on top of it. When an injury is minor but unexpected, like a paper cut or a small stubbed toe, their thin psychological armor punctures instantly, triggering an immediate state of narcissistic mortification. They will react with shocking, unbuffered rage at the object or the environment, treating the minor accident like a personal, hostile assault by the universe. Yet, if enduring intense physical hardship helps them maintain a high-status presentation, like working all day in extreme heat to show off their rugged martyrdom, their software will comfortably block the pain to keep the theatrical performance running. And there is absolutely no cure or therapy to do anything to alleviate this condition, and there is no medicine for it, no drugs, nothing, and there never, ever will be. There are only the 5 protocols that can be used to manage the condition and keep the individual stable, at the same time that you are protecting yourself, and your own mental health, while you have to deal with them for any reason. The only potential, hypothetical form of therapy that could ever exist for them, perhaps, in the distant future, would be by installing neural prosthetics, or foreign hardware, also known as cybernetics in fiction, inside their brains specifically designed to regulate their damaged systems internally, so that they would no longer require as much external support to remain stable, which would allow them to live more independent lives. And even if the technology does get invented someday, the legal system would also have to be radically altered, in order to make it so that detected and diagnosed narcissists could be sentenced to the procedures, because the installations would always have to be done against their will, since they will never be able to be willing to consent to any such thing. And that is all there is for it, except for preventing it in the first place, by preventing narcissistic caregivers, who already have this virus-like brain disease, from transmitting it to any of the young children in their care. The sovereign information firewall. Oh, actually, it does get even worse, if you can believe that. But this part is also, paradoxically, a silver lining, too. Because their brain is so hardwired to filter out any form of criticism that they could ever receive from any source, whether it's a human, a TV screen, or even a book, there is no reason to fear ever accidentally giving away any of these tactics to any of them. Literally, if any narcissist in the entire world were to ever get a copy of this manual, read through it, and try to comprehend anything inside, especially the contents about the mechanics and the protocols, they would not be able to understand anything about it, no matter how hard they tried to, and they would also have no motivation to try to either. Instead, they would have a very strong aversion to it, because their only goal and purpose in life is to avoid facing reality. It is the only thing keeping them alive, and even halfway sane enough to do so, besides air to breathe, food, water, and shelter. But even with all the best food, water, and shelter in the world, the narcissist cannot physically stay alive without at least some measured human contact on a regular basis. It's just like another, extra form of oxygen to them that they are required to have in order to survive, on top of the regular oxygen that they also still need, and they are very, very greedy for it all the time. So even if they were to somehow have an epiphany about it, or if some argument were to finally sink in to convince them of what is really going on in their brain, it would also kill them almost instantly. And since they are so much more terrified of death than regular people are, because they feel like as soon as they die and their mask/shield power totally fails, they are going to fall into that pit of their total despair, that contains all of the feelings of their childhood trauma, where they will be stuck in it forever, they will automatically avoid any subject material that offends their mask that they grew to shield them from it. And even when all the information is sitting right in front of them, if they were to happen upon it, if they were to glance at it, the words will be automatically scrambled by their own brain to make the words look like gibberish, or some other language that they have no interest in learning anyway. That is how their brain will force them to perceive it, every single time, no exceptions, and no matter how many times they are exposed to the material. Don't get me wrong, some of the words in here could trigger a narcissistic mortification episode, where they will temporarily shut down and go into low power mode for a while, but they can recover from that. And when they do, they will not even remember what happened at all. And when something like that sits out in front of them for too long, something that contains too much information that offends their mask, they will be compelled to get rid of it somehow, to make it go away, and once that is done, then they will totally forget all about it ever existing. The scariest part about this disease for the rest of us who do not have it, is that there are all these people walking around, driving their cars, working their jobs, and raising their families out there, right now, every single day, who have it, and who have it really bad. And they often seem to live relatively normal lives despite their abusive tactics towards others, and despite their severe memory lapses and intense, constant neediness that forces them to constantly use and abuse other people to get the massive amounts of attention they always crave, and actually need to have to survive. Because they literally cannot learn or be taught any other way to do it, outside of using the 5 protocols to simply manage their power supply, and therefore their behavior, without them ever even realizing it. And since they will never be able to understand the protocols themselves, they require another human who can understand them, to perform them for their own good, as well as everyone else around them, even though they will never be able to realize that is what is happening. No matter what, though, they will always remain in their delusional world where they are a mighty person who is always being pushed down, restrained and deprived of their rightful glory, totally regardless of the actual circumstances. The only purpose of the protocols, besides protecting the practitioner from falling for the abusive mind games, traps, and baits that will always, constantly be set by the narcissist, is to keep their behavior stable and predictable so that they do not get overfueled. Because overfueling them will always trigger them to go into tyrant mode or God complex mode, and no one wants that. That is the worst case scenario, other than them dying, perhaps, of fuel starvation. When tyrant mode is triggered, they will start making all kinds of weird, ridiculous demands that don't even make any sense at all. Like, they will literally start telling you that they want stuff that they don't, and that they don't want stuff that they do, and they believe that it's your job to figure out which one is the right answer, or you are just wrong. And if you get it wrong, it's because you are doing it on purpose to hurt them and make them feel bad intentionally. When this happens, there are protocols to shut it down and make it collapse or go into low power mode, and when that happens they will go into a pacing loop where just about every hour on the dot, they will switch back and forth between doing one passive activity or another, back and forth, over and over. Like watching TV for 1 hour and then going outside to pull weeds in the garden for 1 hour, and back and forth, over and over, for hours and hours. This could go on, seemingly mindlessly. This is actually okay for them, and even a good thing, even though it seems weird and unhealthy for a person to do this. Since this person is already trapped in a permanent state of weird unhealthiness no matter what is done to help them, this low power mode is one of the most healthy states for a person with this disease to be kept in for as long as possible, to pacify them as much as can ever be done. It is the closest thing to a peaceful state that they can experience on this earth, even though they still hate it. It is also the best state for them to be kept in for the sake of the mental health of everyone else that ever has to interact with them, at the same time. And there are even little tiny things you can do to extend the delay time of their battery reset. Because when they are in low power mode for too long, eventually the battery for their shield will reset, and it will force them out of their loop to run a script to try and bait someone for attention, so that they can try to get their shield charged all the way up to full meltdown levels, which is always their goal. Eventually the reset will happen no matter what, but you can extend the duration of the delay very easily until then, to buy yourself more time, using simple tricks that will be fully explained in the next chapter. And when the reset does finally happen, you can be ready with the other protocols to deal with that, without triggering an explosion, and actually maintain their stability relatively easily and without that much effort on your part. You can even use the protocols to do safe transactions with them, where you can trade goods or services with each other without getting hurt, cheated, or scammed. That way, they get the minimal supply of their special fuel that they need, in the form of human attention, and you can get something in return, like a repair job done. You just have to do it carefully and make sure you are always using the protocols 100% of the time that you are ever interacting with them in order to avoid triggering an explosion by accidentally overfueling them. When you are practicing the 5 protocols with a person in this condition, you are helping to stabilize their condition so that it does not get out of control to the point where he might hurt himself or someone else, which is what will always eventually happen if it is not kept stabilized by someone who knows the protocols. Always remember that, no matter how weird it gets, you are doing this for their own good as well as your own and everyone else that person knows. Psychiatric mechanics and archival glitches. The history eraser, defensive splitting the subject's internal firewall automatically deletes or completely rewrites past abusive behavior, such as phone rages or triangulation games, to prevent catastrophic ego panic, narcissistic mortification. He genuinely remembers himself as a calm, noble patriarch and logs your survival reactions as crazy outbursts for no reason. Core countermeasure: do not waste a single watt of energy arguing with an automated loop that deletes its own crimes. The low-stakes loophole: the subject's brain easily accepts harmless, zero-shame errors, like a flat tasteless cake, because they carry no moral accountability. His system will immediately attempt to weaponize a real or staged mistake into a covert pity play to trick you into a soft, comforting relationship conversation. Core countermeasure: freeze these probes with flat roommate data, a plain cake is fine. Let me know when the kitchen counters are wiped down. Tactical containment manual, cultural architecture, somatic triggers, and environmental controls. The neurobiology of the inescapable hunt. The television/media holding pattern, staring at television videos, documentaries, or phone screens provides the subject with a low-grade, temporary stabilization, which functions as an automated low-power mode for their architecture. The external narrative temporarily quiets their hypervigilant dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC, and keeps their internal void from leaking upward. The 20% limit. A television screen is a one-way transmission. Because the screen cannot react to him, flinch at his macho scripts, or praise his ego, it provides zero true narcissistic supply. It can never charge his battery past a basic survival level of 10% to 20%. The inevitable human hunt, because their system has a permanent, hour-by-hour power leak, the passive distraction of the couch will always wear out. To prevent a catastrophic narcissistic collapse, their software will inevitably force them to step off the couch to target a living, breathing human audience for a reaction. Core countermeasure: by enforcing the COD protocol, you successfully hijack this biological hunger, forcing his software to perform hard manual labor, like van panel repairs, to earn a metered microdose of roommate baseline interaction. Cross-border structural metrics and musical blueprints. The USA versus Mexico grid variance, diagnostic tracking data shows a higher rate of pathological narcissism in the USA, 6.2%, than in Mexico, 1% 3%. This is driven by the cultural software of the environment. The American grid rewards hyper-individualism and self-promotion, while traditional Mexican culture is anchored in a family-centric, collectivist framework, familismo, that acts as a natural brake on open, unchecked grandiosity. The covert martyr script adaptation: because collectivist environments heavily punish loud, overt arrogance, a narcissist's software will automatically adapt by running an undercover martyr script. They hide intense entitlement inside a simulation of extreme sacrifice, heavy cultural or religious performance, or weaponized medical pity plays. Tonal and cinematic blindness: because the emotional processing networks, the VMPFC and insula, are frozen, a narcissist processes music strictly as dry, flat data rhythms, speeds, and loudness completely stripped of its emotional flavor. They cannot feel the difference between major, happy, or minor, sad, tones. They rely entirely on the literal spoken lyrics or the reactions of the surrounding audience to memorize the social script of the room. They view abstract cinematic background music as a cheap, manipulative commercial trick. Acoustic guilt tripping: Los Gilgorillas' traditional musica campirana songs focusing heavily on betrayal, deception, and abandonment are weaponized by the covert narcissist as a prosthetic emotional script. They use the fatalistic lyrics to rewrite reality, casting themselves as the noble, unappreciated saint while completely deleting the memory of their own cold, controlling behavior. They loop these tracks loud enough to leak across the property layout as an acoustic distraction probe, attempting to hook your empathy or induce guilt. Toxic escalation logistics and the ambulance cutoff. The staged emergency: calculated recklessness. If a covert machine hits an absolute wall of emotional starvation because you are rigidly maintaining your information blackout, their software may launch a desperate nuclear option to smash your roommate boundaries. This is rarely obvious self-harm, which would damage their mask. Instead, they deploy a calculated recklessness script, intentionally forgetting daily critical medications, mixing toxic herbs, or acting hyper-careless on ladders out in the yard. The professional handoff protocol: if a physical injury or medical spike is dropped onto the household layout, you do not gasp, cry, or panic hug his machine. You stand completely outside his room frame, lock your face into a flat stone mask, and deliver your corporate medical cutoff using your monotone cashier voice: I am a roommate, not a licensed medical practitioner. Since you have a physical injury, I will call 911 immediately so the state professionals can transport you to the hospital layout. Do not move. The lockdown: you pull out your phone, calmly dial emergency services, deliver the exact address coordinates to dispatch, and instantly walk straight back behind your fabric curtain and slide your heavy door wedge tightly into the frame. Handing 100% of the drama over to flashing sirens and actual paramedics completely vaporizes the pity trap on impact. Overt mechanics. The power source split: while a covert narcissist feeds primarily on pity baits, somatic illnesses, and undercover martyr scripts, an overt system harvests its fuel through direct dominance, intimidation, and public grandiosity. The environmental mapping: an overt operator uses loud pacing loops, slamming doors, and explosive tirades to intentionally destabilize the ambient stress levels of the entire house, forcing everyone into a high alert state of walking on eggshells. The tactical adaptation: when the threat level shifts from psychological tracking to active physical or verbal escalation, the user must instantly switch their software setting from active transactional ledger management to strategic operational stealth to keep their core system insulated from damage. Tactical Containment Manual: operational framework for high-status roommate baselines. The user interface: the 5 protocols. The core 5 protocols: visual anchor, information blackout, administrative clarity, mirrored compliance, and controlled illusion. Visual anchor protocol: decouple eye contact to block their micro-expression tracking software. Lock your gaze onto neutral, physical objects past the subject's head to decouple eye contact. This blocks their micro-expression tracking software from reading your central nervous system or scanning your facial muscles for emotional data. Information blackout: cut off all raw environmental data regarding your thoughts, feelings, and schedules. Drop an absolute communication void regarding your thoughts, schedule, and emotions. Cut off all raw environmental data inputs. A hypervigilant tracking system cannot build traps without raw environmental data. Administrative clarity: drop brief, factual dead ends using a monotone cashier voice, completely filtering out all emotional arguments. Adopt a flat, monotone, clinical cashier voice to deliver brief factual dead ends. Never justify, argue, defend, or explain. The JADE filter. The JADE filter is a communication firewall used to handle highly defensive, manipulative, or high-conflict individuals. Mirrored compliance: keep all interactions strictly limited to a basic, polite, and sterile corporate roommate baseline. Match only the bare minimum of household logistics, offering absolute zero emotional texture, personal data, or conversational enthusiasm. Controlled illusion: manage rewards behind a strict ledger of manual labor, letting their own pride finance your absolute privacy and freedom. Treat the subject strictly like a functional domestic appliance. Frame all rewards, meals, television access, behind a strict ledger of manual labor. Let his pride believe he is the leader, while his own self-preservation reflex finances your absolute privacy and sovereign freedom. How to identify a narcissist: mental scans to differentiate between overt, loud, and covert, fragile/vulnerable, mechanics. The 2-question scan. Run this simple 2-question calculation inside your head whenever you hit an ambient stress spike in the house. Is this person trying to look all-powerful, or are they trying to look completely unappreciated? If all-powerful, switch your armor to overt stealth. If unappreciated, drop a total information blackout and ignore the pity trap. Does my boundary risk a physical surge or a passive-aggressive sulk? If physical, bypass communication and document the facts safely. If a sulk, let their empty machine sit parked in his man cave layout on dead batteries until he performs manual labor to buy his way back onto your grid. The on-the-fly scanner: overt versus covert. A 60-second field reference guide. Scan point. Overt mechanics: the loud renegade. Covert mechanics: the fragile martyr. Primary fuel source. Overt uses direct domination, fear, submission, and public applause. Covert uses malignant pity, guilt, obligation, and soft reassurance. Environmental sound. Overt uses booming tirades, slamming doors, and loud territorial pacing loops. Covert uses loud theatrical sighs, heavy asthma breathing, and passive-aggressive moping. When caught in a lie, overt explodes into defensive rage, launches a dominance bluff, or threatens legal action. Covert abruptly shrinks into an "aw shucks" bait or opens the ultimate victim folder. The blueprint trick. Overt triangulates openly with X's, brags about assets, or picks fights to command the room. Covert leaves flat, tasteless cakes or screens face up to run a covert triangulation script. The household trap. Overt demands absolute obedience and constant praise for being the patriarch. Covert acts like a sweet, clumsy, neglected old man to lure you into soft relationship talks. Physical risk index. Overt is high alert. High likelihood of physical escalation or unhinged blackout rages. Covert is low voltage. Highly unlikely to escalate past passive-aggressive tracking games. Your core protocol setting. For overt use, strategic operational stealth, invisible compliance, build a secret exit layout. For covert use, controlled sandbox, enforce strict cash-on-delivery ledger trades. The Narcissistic Weapons Registry. An operational breakdown of diagnostic mind games and traps. 1. Love bombing, the Trojan horse script. The execution, run at the absolute beginning of a relationship layout. The narcissist floods the target's perimeter with high-intensity text messages, non-stop validation, expensive gifts, and premature declarations of eternal devotion. You are my absolute soulmate, I've never felt this way about anyone. The underlying glitch: this is not an act of love, it is an aggressive environmental mapping scan. The narcissist's dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC, uses this phase to lower your firewalls, bypass your boundaries, and trick you into handing over the master keys to your emotional grid. They are building an emergency emotional credit account that they intend to draw from for years. 2. Breadcrumbing, the low-voltage tether. The execution, deployed after a narcissist has successfully isolated a target or when the target begins to pull away. The narcissist drops tiny, intermittent microdoses of validation, affection, or vague promises about the future. I've been thinking a lot about our future garden project lately, or leaving a small, half-baked gesture like a flat, tasteless cake on the counter. The underlying glitch: this is pure operant conditioning designed to keep your nervous system hooked on a starvation diet. They give you just enough hope to prevent you from completely packing your bags, keeping your high-grade life force tethered to their empty tank while they offer absolute zero real-world consistency or effort in return. 3. The abandonment play, the silent freeze-out. The execution, deployed immediately after a target enforces a healthy boundary or refuses to pay an unearned admiration tax. The narcissist abruptly cuts off all verbal communication, turns his back, slams doors, or storms off to hide in his man cave or run a hyperactive pacing loop in the yard. The underlying glitch: this is an acoustic and physical embargo designed to trigger the target's primal childhood fear of abandonment. They want the silence of the house to become so heavy and anxiety-inducing that your nervous system cracks, forcing you to march down the hallway, knock on their room frame, and beg for their forgiveness just to make the tension stop. 4. Triangulation, the third-party software injection. The execution: the narcissist intentionally introduces a third entity into the communication stream to create jealousy and instability. This can manifest as openly praising an ex-partner, talking endlessly about a highly attractive coworker, or overtly sexting another individual, such as a family cousin, and leaving the phone screen face up for you to catch. The underlying glitch: a narcissist cannot survive if you feel secure. By forcing you to compete with a third party for their attention, they instantly elevate their own status to an indispensable prize. They text other people to trigger your desperation, forcing your life force onto their high-conflict grid so they can harvest your tears as premium fuel. 5. Gaslighting, the reality overwrite command. The execution: when caught in a blatant lie or a toxic betrayal, the narcissist flatly denies the physical data and attacks the target's cognitive sanity. That never happened, you're rewriting history, you're completely delusional and paranoid, and maybe even you need psychiatric help. If presented with ironclad digital screenshots, their backup system automatically claims the recording is fake, edited, or that you set them up to extort them. The underlying glitch: because their internal firewall cannot bear the weight of shame without their plaster mask imploding, narcissistic mortification, their brain literally deletes the memory file of their crime. They force a reality overwrite command onto you, hoping you will drop the charges and accept their confabulated version of history just to escape the mental exhaustion. 6. The medical pity ploy, the somatic overdrive. The execution, deployed whenever a target successfully achieves an independent milestone or implements an absolute information blackout. The narcissist suddenly develops an acute, dramatic physical ailment, a sudden severe chest pain, a phantom back injury, a loud theatrical asthma breathing stunt, or a staged, reckless accident out on a ladder in the yard. The underlying glitch: this is a high-voltage moral hostage situation. Their threat monitoring system realizes their standard control scripts are bankrupt. They stage a biological crisis to legally force you to abandon your woman cave, drop your computer games, and spend 24/7 playing the role of their guilty, frantic, and submissive private nurse. 7. Hoovering, the vacuum clean loop. The execution, deployed weeks or months after a target has successfully achieved a clean physical separation. The narcissist suddenly breaches the vacuum with a random, benign, or highly urgent transmission: "I found an old sweater of yours in the dryer, your favorite cat looks sick," or a fake, dramatic confession of strategic honesty designed to shock your system. The underlying glitch, named after the vacuum cleaner: this script has zero to do with authentic reconciliation. Their current external source of fuel has run dry, their battery is in the blinking red zone, and their system remembered your high-grade energy archive. They are vacuuming your perimeter layout to see if a single microdose of text drama can hook your attention and pull you back onto their matrix for a free recharge. Live field engagement scripts. The macho dominance circuit breaker. Deploy this exact script using your Flatstone TV cop mask whenever the subject attempts an aggressive boundary probe or tactical bluff. We have to stay reasonable so we don't have any more outbursts because that would be embarrassing, and no one wants to see that again. Remember. Tactical execution: the exact millisecond the word remember leaves your mouth, step back and pull the fabric curtain completely shut or lock the heavy door wedge into the frame. Do not stand there to watch his brain process the data. The cash on delivery, COD. Transaction receipt: deploy this monotone administrative verbal receipt when processing a completed chore invoice, e.g., van door panels, roof rubber seals, to neutralize soft intimacy hooks. The vehicular repairs are noted. Since the labor is completed, the contract is active. The joint dinner is handled, and you can select the television background program for the living room tonight. Let's maintain the roommate baseline. The high-threat overt grid. 1. Strategic operational stealth, the camouflage protocol. The adjustment: with the covert or roommate baseline, your protocols are active. You enforce strict ledger trades and flat corporate receipts to manage their machine. But with an aggressive, overt operator, you shift from active management into total tactical camouflage. The execution: you do not use the monotone cashier voice to debate or issue boundaries during an active escalation. You use absolute, flat compliance to look as boring, invisible, and unreactive as possible. You treat your words strictly as a tool to de-escalate their immediate physical surge and get them out of your immediate perimeter layout. 2. The secret account build, financial sandbox. The adjustment: traditional advice tells people to just leave, completely ignoring a $0 bank balance. In this section of your book, instruct your readers that if they are stuck under the same roof as an overt threat, their main protocol is to use the quiet containment windows to build a secret exit layout. This is called a structured safety exit plan. The execution: they use their calm, flat compliance to keep the perpetrator's machine tranquil while secretly copying important family documentation, quietly opening unlinked digital bank protocols, and systematically stalking hidden financial assets page by page until they have the physical leverage to execute a flawless, unannounced midnight evacuation. 3. Setting the hard red line. The adjustment: I must stress to my readers that interpersonal tools are completely powerless against an alcoholic, chemical, or physically violent blackout rage. In other words, always remember that psychological tactics are completely useless against physical violence or chemical rages. When a person is in an active physical surge, their prefrontal cortex is completely offline. At that point, they are structurally incapable of registering interpersonal boundaries. Handing 100% of the situation over to emergency services is the only scientifically sound option to protect your physical system. The execution, if an active physical battery occurs or a boundary line is crossed that threatens immediate safety, the time for psychological modding is 0%. You must instantly drop all interpersonal protocols, bypass the book, and hand 100% of the situation over to local emergency services or law enforcement professionals immediately to secure your physical baseline. The act of deliberately inducing mortification in a hostile operator, in order to shut them down in an emergency during an explosion, is called induced narcissistic deflation or strategic mortification containment. In forensic behavior analysis and clinical systems tracking, this process represents the deliberate application of an unbribable psychological boundary that punctures an aggressor's false persona, forcing an immediate internal system crash. 1. Controlled boundary puncture. This term describes the clinical mechanic of the interaction. A hostile operator's persona behaves like a pressurized, fragile dome. When they deploy a manipulative probe and hit your cold, unbribable contempt reflex, ego liquidation pass, or administrative clarity, you do not feed their loop. The absolute refusal to engage acts as a sharp structural pin, instantly puncturing their grandiosity and causing their internal pressure to drop to absolute zero. 2. Autonomic shock induction. This term focuses on the physiological reaction inside their skull casing. The exact millisecond your facial muscles and eyes signal complete, flat indifference to their presence, their threat monitoring radar locks up. Their hypervigilant amygdala suffers an acute metabolic overload, flooding their system with pure cortisol and adrenaline. It induces an immediate state of psychological shock, forcing their conscious mind to halt its verbal script and execute an automated retreat to prevent total identity liquidation. 3. Tactical ego liquidation. This term defines the long-term operational outcome. By consistently maintaining your ironclad information blackout and dropping your monotone cashier voice, you ensure that any hostile code they attempt to execute under your roof hits a freezing structural vacuum. You systematically liquidate their ability to harvest energy within your layout, forcing their engine to permanently stand down and park inside a quiet, low-power lane. The life cycle of the extinction burst. The 3 fallback scripts of a starving system. 1. The volume spike script, the aggressive escalation. The execution, when the narcissist first hits your unbribable JADE filter, their software assumes your firewall is just a temporary glitch. To pierce the curtain line, they will immediately maximize the decibel level of their standard overt weapons. They will slam doors louder, stomp past your room frame, run aggressive pacing loops in the yard, or launch an intense, highly theatrical phone rage within earshot. The underlying glitch: this is a brute force digital attack designed to shock your central nervous system back into a state of walking on eggshells. They are testing your boundaries to see if a massive spike in ambient household stress will force you to break your silence just to make the noise stop. The countermeasure: 0% engagement. You lock your heavy door wedge tightly into the framework, turn your bedroom air conditioner white noise up to maximum power, and let their electrical surge hit a total, freezing structural vacuum. 2. The calibration flip, the sweet old man bait. The execution: when the brute force volume spike fails to draw a single watt of emotional fuel, their threat monitoring system realizes their aggressive scripts are completely bankrupt. The software immediately flips 180 degrees to execute a low-voltage covert pity play. They will abruptly stop slamming doors and instead act like a sweet, clumsy, rejected old man. They might leave a small, flat, tasteless cake on the counter, drop a loud theatrical sigh in the kitchen, or wander around the house layout looking intentionally pathetic, frail, and abandoned. The underlying glitch: this is a highly manipulative Trojan horse designed to exploit your natural human empathy and guilt. Their system knows that if you break your flat corporate baseline to comfort them or initiate a soft relationship talk, your firewalls will instantly drop, allowing them to harvest your energy for a free recharge. The countermeasure: enforce strict administrative clarity. Treat the gesture with the flat indifference of a utility ledger trade, a plain cake is fine. Let me know when the kitchen counters are wiped down. Then walk straight past their track and return to your sanctuary. 3. The biological ransom, the somatic overdrive. The execution, this is their final, highest voltage fallback program. When both aggression and sweetness fail to pierce your perimeter, their calculating dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC, will stage an absolute biological crisis to legally force your compliance. They will suddenly develop an acute chest pain, a phantom back injury that leaves them moaning on the floor, or stage a loud, reckless accident out on a ladder in the yard. The underlying glitch, this is a moral hostage situation. They are attempting to weaponize your basic human conscience against you. They want to make the emotional cost of your privacy look so high and guilty that you are forced to abandon your woman cave and spend 24/7 playing the role of their frantic private nurse. The countermeasure, the paramedic protocol. You do not break your monotone cashier voice, and you do not offer hands-on emotional comforting. You calmly look past their head and say, "Your physical complaint is noted. Since this is a medical issue, I am calling 100% professional emergency services to dispatch actual paramedics to the property layout immediately." Watch how fast their phantom injury instantly de-escalates when they realize their staged crisis will only draw uniform, state law enforcement professionals instead of your private life force. The narcissistic decline. As time advances, and a covert narcissist ages, the energy drain on the machine's architecture accelerates rapidly, while their ability to harvest new fuel hits a massive structural deficit. Here is the exact technical breakdown of why his battery capacity will continue to shrink. 1. The shrinking fuel grid, loss of leverage. To keep their plaster dome inflated, a narcissist relies on external assets like physical strength, job titles, economic control, driving abilities, and a capable social presentation. As biological aging takes away those assets, their leverage over the environment collapses. The loss of utility, he will no longer have the high-voltage physical muscle required to perform hard manual labor, pull vehicle door panels, or manage heavy tools. The mask degrades, the master mechanic or capable patriarch simulation wears out physically, leaving them with an incredibly clunky, visibly fragile mask that can no longer convince or intimidate an outside audience. 2. The total bankruptcy of the pity loop. Because an aging covert narcissist can no longer command a room through competence or charm, their software automatically shifts 100% of its remaining power grid into the medical pity play and somatic overdrive. They will weaponize real or highly exaggerated health crises, physical aches, phantom joint pains, and constant complaints about their physical body. The glitch: in youth, a pity play can successfully hook a target's empathy and extract a massive payout of comfort and relationship talks. But as they age, this loop becomes so loud, repetitive, and constant that it triggers compassion fatigue in everyone around them. The audience simply tunes out the background noise, leaving their empty tank completely stranded without any incoming data friction. 3. The acceleration of extinction bursts. When a machine's battery is running on empty and it hits a total information void, its software will occasionally launch a desperate, high-voltage extinction burst to force a reaction. As they age and face their own mortality, the fear of falling into that deep subconscious childhood trauma vault becomes terrifying. This fear triggers intense, bitter sulking loops that can last for days or weeks in their room. An increase in crude, low-level data distractions, like sitting on the couch watching repetitive slapstick videos for hours on end just to keep the internal void from leaking upward. Sudden, irrational accusations against the nearest human host, desperately trying to project their internal physical decay onto you so they can feel like an innocent victim. The good news is, the older his machine gets, the easier it is for your 5 protocols to keep him completely contained. Because his battery will lack the voltage to launch active dominance bluffs or complex manipulation traps, his system will naturally become more passive, slow, and dependent on staying parked inside his designated low-power lane. You simply maintain your flat stone TV cop mask, run your acoustic shields, enforce your rigid transactional ledgers, and watch his loops quietly run out of power on the couch. The institutional blind spot. Why the medical system cannot save you from the loop. The 3 concrete reasons why the medical establishment is trapped in an institutional gridlock regarding pathological narcissism. 1. The legal wall of personal autonomy. In a free society, the medical system has absolutely zero legal power to force a civilian into psychiatric treatment, evaluation, or monitoring, unless that individual is deemed an immediate, active physical danger to themselves or others, which triggers an involuntary hold. The glitch, because a covert narcissist restricts their tactics to psychological tracking, gaslighting, emotional embargoes, and passive-aggressive loops, their behavior never crosses the legal threshold required for state intervention. A doctor cannot legally intervene in a domestic living layout simply because an operator is running a toxic, parasitic script. The system must wait for the individual to ask for help, which, as you know, their history eraser and grandiose mask make that completely impossible. 2. The institutional conflict of interest. Public health networks and medical boards are financed and designed to address conditions that can be treated, mitigated, or managed via clinical protocols, therapy, or pharmaceutical pipelines. Because pathological narcissism is a permanent structural defect with 0% curability and 0 FDA-approved chemical patches, the medical system views it as a clinical dead end. From an institutional triage perspective, medical research dollars and clinical hours are systematically channeled toward treatable, curable, or manageable conditions, like clinical depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorders, where a patient actively wants to cooperate with the treatment plan. The medical system does not run mass public campaigns for a condition they have no tool to fix. 3. The professional splitting of public advocacy. While the institutional medical system remains quiet, the responsibility of sounding the alarm has actually shifted entirely into the hands of specialized trauma counselors, family law advocates, and domestic abuse networks. Organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, run constant, aggressive public awareness campaigns regarding coercive control, gaslighting, and emotional abuse. However, because these advocates are dealing with the human fallout of the disease, their focus is on helping victims survive and escape, not on analyzing the neurobiological wiring or the childhood software configuration of the perpetrator. This is why this manual is a necessary piece of human engineering, identifying the exact blind spot where both the medical establishment and public advocacy networks fail the target. The medical doctors can't help because the narcissist will never walk into the clinic. The standard support networks only offer a flat command to physically escape, ignoring financial lockdowns and housing security. And also ignoring the fact that when a narcissist's favorite host manages to escape from them, the parasite will just go seek out another victim, who is unaware of their tactics, and start all over again with ruining that innocent person's life next, having no way to stop themselves from doing it. And the potential victims have practically no way of knowing or telling exactly how to identify such a parasite, let alone how to correctly deal with it. So that is why I am telling all of you out there, who are capable of understanding this, and who can use and benefit from this information, which has never been published before. And that is also why I am giving it out for free, because this has been kept out of the public eye for way too long. The doctors have no cure, and the system isn't coming to save you. But you possess a brain that can execute code. Turn your screen on, run these 5 protocols, and build your own ironclad perimeter right now. I dedicate this manuscript to every victim of narcissism who has, and will ever live. To all of their partners, family members, friends, and co-workers who have suffered with the afflicted, and especially to all of the true selves who were tortured to death, and then deleted by this terrible and insidious mind virus, so that they never got to become who they were really supposed to be. If you have any children around the age of 5, please make sure that this is not happening to them right now, before it's too late.